Oh, bonjour, bonjour. I'm curious how many people were dancing with me when we joined yesterday at the top of the hour. Dr. Varden and I joined when we were dancing, and we were discussing how when it comes to the benefit of exercise, especially against sour mood, against depression, dancing comes up better than any other form of exercise out there. So as we listen to music, I really encourage people to dance along. Bonjour to everyone who's joined. My name is Dr. Krista Kosterman, and I have the pleasure of navigating this evening with you, where we're going to be discussing BDNF, what on earth that stands for and why it's really important and how it matters to you. Unfortunately, I know that Dr. Lara Varden, a favorite of mine, a favorite of yours, was intended to join. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond her control, she's not able to join us this evening, but she does extend her warm hello. And I'm grateful that I get to deliver some material that we discussed together today. I want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself, talking to this screen. So please make sure you're filling out the survey, and let's keep this interactive. If you have something you want to say, if you have a thought, question, anything, toss it in the chat. I want to hear from you. I don't want this to be a conversation between me, my screen, and my cats. So please engage. Um, while people are filling out our opening poll, we want to know who's here, why you're here, right? Let's first introduce this evening's topic. So we're talking about BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Love the cats. Thanks, Trudy. I love my cats too. They may make an appearance. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What is this? It's something that is becoming more and more popular. You're going to read about it more and more. And a lot of people in shorthand will call it the miracle grow of the brain. Okay, so tonight, what I would like to discuss with you is what exactly is this miracle grow of the brain. I want to talk about how both age and genetics influence it, especially over the course of your lifetime, and why that matters. And then I also want to talk about, especially as you get older, or if you have suboptimal genetic presentations, what can you be doing in order to support the amount of BDNF and why that's important, right? So before we jump into it, let us first tap into that poll that everyone was filling out. So if the powers that be wanna put it up there. Okay, so the first question we asked, really engaging question: how familiar are you with BDNF? And we have about 60% of the audience that says, somewhat, I've heard of it, but maybe don't have a lot of the detail, with about 30% of our audience having never heard of it or just not being familiar. So we'll make sure we really break down, especially in the context of your health. Why do you care about this? Why are we talking about this evening? Okay. The next we asked, do you do anything from a lifestyle perspective in order to support it? And I love this. I love our audience that shows up, and so many of you have. So from exercise, diet, about 70% are doing something. Some people are saying occasionally, other people are saying, I love the honesty there. Thank you for that. Um, the next question that we asked, are you aware that genetic factors can influence BDNF? And I adore our audience, 70% said they were aware. Okay. With the balance saying no or unsure. And, we'll talk about the elements that we don't have in our control, right? We can't control a calendar per se, but we'll talk about that. The last question here, we asked, do you think that you can teach an old dog new tricks? And there's reason behind this, with 90% of our audience having optimism in that space, and only about 5% saying no, or not if it comes to not if it comes to my partner, right? They're not open and willing to learn. Okay. So let's jump into what we are speaking about today. Let's stop talking about it in vagaries. So BDNF, what exactly is it? So it is a protein that is very central and critical to your brain's development as well as maintenance. Okay. So when we say development, it really is, it's something that will be peaking, something be most accessible and quickly made in childhood, adolescence, and very, very early adulthood, right? It's something that helps us grow our brain, something that helps create connections. as well as it's really important, especially as we get older, to the maintenance, to effectively keeping your brain fresh and something that is ready, willing, and able to support you in your day-to-day activities. Okay. So let's dive a little bit more specifically into how does it play into development? How does it play into maintenance? And this is very specific within the brain. The first thing that BDNF is going to be facilitating is something called neuroplasticity. Okay, so once upon a time, we, the doctors, we, the scientists of the world said, if you get knocked on the head, you lose some brain cells and you're flat out of luck. Thankfully, there was a renaissance and there was an awareness that your brain actually can change. You can teach that dog new tricks. Neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to rewire, is at the heart of that. And one of the key actors, one of the key facilitators of this neuroplasticity, meaning growing new neurons and growing connections between those neurons, okay, that is BDNF. Okay, so this protein within the brain is very central to both that happy creation and then the connection of our neurons. And that is at the heart of teaching that old dog new tricks. Okay. Again, the next thing that BDNF is very, very important for is going to be neural protection. Okay, it's one thing to grow, it's a very different thing to keep safe and to maintain what you have, right? And when I talked about BDNF being a miracle grow, right? You pop in some miracle grow, you know that you can flourish your plant. But we also know you have to protect that plant, right? Putting Miracle Grow on and then sticking in a closet without light, or maybe sticking it outside in the cold, that's not going to do anything good. But BDNF is kind of neat in that it serves both ends. It helps grow, and then it helps provide that environment that maintains that plant, maintains the brain. And as we'll learn a little bit later, this is especially and exceptionally important, or especially, sorry, important when it comes to brain injury, right? So if you have a history of concussion or traumatic brain injury, being aware of your BDNF status and being aware of means to support that becomes very important, because again, following that trauma, we want something that will help grow, nurture, and maintain the brain. Okay. The next thing, and I think this is, very dear to my heart, if anyone's listened to me on my webinars already, my chats, mental health is is central to a part of my practice. And BDNF is integral to the maintenance of mental health. There's incredible correlation in research that looks at lower levels of BDNF has very strongly correlated, has people prone towards developing anxiety and depression, right? A lot of what will feed in there is our relationship that we have with our memories. So, for example, something very traumatic happens to you, right? That memory is created within the brain. You move forward and something triggers that memory, right? Maybe it's a horrible car accident. On the day of your car accident, you were wearing a green sweater. And so when you see green sweaters, maybe that triggers that memory. BDNF is something that really helps that relationship with that memory, meaning, are you going to dwell on it? Are you going to become obsessed with it? Are you going to cycle over it? Or do you have a little bit of space to be like, okay, memory is triggered, but I don't need to be very ruminative around it. Okay. Adequate levels of BDNF help with that relationship to the memory, as well as really importantly, help with mood, help with depression, help with anxiety. Okay. The last thing, and I think this is an emerging thing within research, so we don't really know the how, we just know it's strongly correlated, but BDNF is really, really important when it comes to metabolic function and to energy function. Okay, this is likely because we know BDNF helps with keeping the brain healthy, maintained. And when the brain is not in a healthy or maintained state, when it's a little bit mucky, right? You haven't been doing that maintenance on all your neurons, or you're not fostering new connections, right? That tends to bleed over into other areas and maybe has you craving comfort, which shifts your metabolic performance, or maybe has you staying up too late, not able to maintain sleep schedules, which we know again will impact. Okay. So to kind of to bring it back again, why do we care about BDNF? Because BDNF does all these things for us. It helps us grow our brain. It helps us learn things that are before us, helps us keep our brain clean and active. Okay. It's vital and central towards mood, right? So feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety, especially for those people who have very intrusive thoughts, intrusive memories, right? As we progress into this presentation, I'm going to talk about certain supplements that I have found absolutely vital to people as they start to shift their mood or start to shift some of their relationships to their memories. Okay. Um, and then lastly, why is it really important? It really influences some metabolic health, right? And we don't know fully the why of that. But again, speculation is because if it influences mood, it influences capacity to sleep, that spills out into so many other different things. Okay. A very common theme we see within the within questions that we get within webinars, within my inbox, things of that nature. A lot of people are asking around dementia, neurodegenerative disease. Okay, BDNF is correlated insofar as levels begin to drop, you see that rise or that rise in instance of, right? Things like Alzheimer's, things like dementia, they're very multifactorial, meaning it's not just one thing. No one's going to be able to come and say this thing and this thing alone will give you those conditions, right? We even know if you have a gene for it. That's not fatalistic. But BDNF is one of those things that if you have the decline of it, increases the likelihood towards presentation. All right. So now let's dive a little bit into what are factors that can determine what levels of BDNF you could have. Okay. And I'm looking through the chat right now, again, making sure it's not me just talking into a box. And I'm seeing a lot of people saying hello, sous bonjour. I'm seeing so many different pockets of the world tonight too. I'm seeing so far just Canada and the US, but I'd love to know if we have anyone outside of Canada in the US. And then as we go through, I'm really curious to hear from different people, do you know your genetic presentation when it comes to BDNF, or where do you sit on this age curve? Because age is also going to be a really important factor. Okay. Bonjour, Gina. Okay. Oh, we have New Zealand in the house. That was going to make me happy. And Australia. Oh, bonjour. Or hello. I don't know what they say down under. I apologize. Hello backwards. All right. Okay, so let's jump into specifically what do genes and what does age say about your BDNF status. Okay, we're going to start with genes. So the first gene we do start with is a gene very aptly called BDNF. Okay, and you're going to examine this gene. It's something that we have in our mood and behavior report. Okay, and there's two different presentations, namely an AG or an AA. So those are alleles that I'm talking to. You can look directly into your report. And if you have one of those two presentations, it means unfortunately you're a little bit suboptimal when it comes to creating the protein that is BDNF. You have suboptimal levels. Does that mean you're not making it? Absolutely not. If you're able to learn, I promise you're making it, right? It's just you're maybe not making it in the desired levels, the desired levels that offer best health outcomes. Okay. There's also another really interesting quirk here, or another gene that you need to look at. And for the nerds out there, this is where we get to have a lot of fun. Okay. So we used to think, let's just look at BDNF. This gene is going to tell us everything we need to know. And for a really long time in my clinical practice, I would have people come to me and they would have an optimal BDNF presentation. The optimal presentation is GG. And yet when I would ask them questions, about their mental health, about their capacity and their resilience when it comes to learning, they wouldn't present like that. They'd be like, I actually present as if I have suboptimal, right? And they're still young. There's no reason along these two metric of age and genes that they should be wrong. Well, we found that there's another gene that influences this, okay? There's a gene, and you'll find this again in your mood and behavior report. It's called TPH2. Okay. And if we look at this gene by itself, it's really important to the synthesis of serotonin in the brain. Okay. So nothing to do with BDNF, but important to the synthesis of BDNF, or sorry, serotonin in the brain. But if you have an optimal presentation of BDNF, that's the GG, and you have an optimal presentation of TPH2, meaning you're really good at creating and making this serotonin, those interestingly interact and get you to a point where you're suboptimal now in the way you're creating your BDNF. Okay. This is something we called epistasis. Epi meaning above, stasis meaning to stop. And again, for the people that find the mystery and the magic in science, this is kind of one of those, you have to think about DNA as this beautiful helical structure. It means that some genes are closer to one another than others, right? And these two genes, based on where they're placed and based on this presentation, their electrochemistry kind of interferes with one another, okay? Meaning that TPH2, if you have that GG presentation, quashes the ability of BDNF if you also have that optimal presentation. Okay, so what I've just said, to bring it back, if you're looking at BDNF as a gene by itself, if you have an AG or an AA presentation, that by itself is suboptimal. If you have the optimal GG presentation, you also got to look at your TPH2. And if that happens to be GG as well, meaning you got G's across the board, okay, unfortunately, that gene is suppressing the activity, and that makes you suboptimal when it comes to the form and function of this protein, of this enzyme, okay? As we know it right now, this is unidirectional, meaning TPH2 will influence BDNF, but we haven't seen any evidence that BDNF influences the production of serotonin, okay? And I'm seeing in the chat here that there's a few people that already know, just based on their BDNF gene alone, that they're suboptimal. So I'm glad that you have access to that, because I think what's going to become very important for you, Corey, for who else is there, for Terry, for you guys, right? What's going to become really important is the second part of what we're talking about. What can you do? Okay. Um, the other thing that we need to consider, and this is completely independent of genes, is where are you across the course of your life, right? As I mentioned in the beginning, BDNF, the amount you're making, changes, of course, the course of your life. Because again, think about this: when you are a baby, when you're a toddler, an adolescent, and your early adulthood, you're learning and growing so much. Okay. And so we really need that juice, that miracle growth for the brain. Okay. So your levels across those phases of your life, right? You're peaking at around late adolescence, early to mid 20s, again, depending on where you sit on that developmental curve. Okay. Then after that, once you sneak into your 20s and 30s, that's where you start to see the natural decline. Okay. Meaning someone independent of genetic presentation, someone who is mid 20s, let's say, is going to have markedly higher levels compared to someone who's in their 60s, almost independent. Okay. So if you're sitting on here, I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing a lot of wonderful people who are sitting in their 60s and their 70s. I'm so very glad and grateful that you guys are here, because I think that's the part of your life where, if anything, you need to be thinking about longevity and living more, right? You've earned that life. Let's continue to earn it. So for you, this is also going to be really important as to what can you do to continually increase your BDNF, right? Because the more you increase, the more we have that learning capacity, the more you're staving off things like Alzheimer's, like dementia, right? As well as, and something that's really important to me, is simply feeling good. You know, having a mood that enables a really happy, cuddly, cozy life. Okay. So again, two things to be thinking of: thinking about your genetic presentation and thinking about your age. And those people that kind of have that unfortunate crossover of poor genetic presentation, as well as they're getting up there in years, right? Really need to be thinking about, what can I do to increase my BDNF? Okay. So let's dig into that. Let's understand. And I'm already seeing some people here who are spoiler alerting, and I love it. Sanjay, you're giving some spoiler alerts. I think Gina's a little bit alluding to a spoiler alert around sauna and exercise, right? So I want to talk about that as to what you can do to increase. Okay. Before we do that, let's talk about things that naturally decrease your BDNF. Before we talk about the positives, let's talk about what you can just simply cut out in order to increase or maintain the levels of BDNF. So unfortunately, unless you have a time machine, age is going to do that. You can't cut that out. What else can you cut out? Okay. Alcohol. I think I saw Dirk earlier in the chat mentioning something about drinking. Alcohol categorically, for many different reasons, will decrease the amount of BDNF, both in a situational moment, as in like what do you have access to immediately afterwards, but separate to that, if you're kind of chronically abusing, chronically drinking in a very unhealthy way, that will overall decrease the amount of BDNF that you're producing and have access to. Okay. Lack of sleep. A lot of strong research around this, insofar as if you are not getting adequate sleep and good sleep at that, you're going to have decreased levels of BDNF compared to your age cohort. Okay. It's a tricky one. I hate telling people stuff like that because I know sleep is a tricky thing for many people, but sleep is very important. And so supporting and maintaining good sleep will support your BDNF. Okay. What else is there? Okay. The other thing is going to be around your, oh, 1 second, my brain. The other thing that you can be doing here is stress. Okay. Stress based on the hormonal and neurotransmitter kind of cascade, especially those folk who are experiencing chronic stress, okay, they will also have lesser levels of BDNF compared to their age cohort, okay? And this is kind of a survival mode, right? If you're in a state of stress chronically, body is more focused on that sympathetic nervous system as opposed to, okay, that rest and repair that enables that growth within the brain. Okay. There's a lot of different mechanisms, but that's kind of the heuristic, or at least the way you can think about it. Okay. So from the things to be avoiding, okay, got to be getting good sleep, got to be having reasonable amounts, if any, alcohol, right? And being very mindful of stress. Okay. And I did say at the top, and we will as we talk about how can you go about supporting your BDNF, there's instances where stress can be helpful, right? We're really talking about that long-standing chronic stress. We're not kind of talking about, if you have to experience a stress for a few days. Okay. Because if anything, BDNF is something that helps you endure and protects your brain during that kind of acute, unavoidable stress. Okay. All right. Someone in the question just before I moved on, it was Gina. She said, what do you consider adequate sleep, especially due to there's an element of personalization there. Okay. There's a few different answers to that. I think quality of sleep and then quantity of sleep, two different questions. From a quantity of sleep perspective, there's newer research coming out that's saying females, right, we require more sleep. So I think traditionally most people say 8 hours is the way to go. And then you have the Bill Clintons of the world who are like, cool, I can do it on 4. And then you have other people who are like, I don't get out of bed unless I've had 12, right? There's definitely a variability, but by and large, 8 tends to be that sweet spot. Okay, with acknowledgement that females are now starting to say we need more sleep, especially when you're in and around menses. Okay. They'll probably an hour or two. There's that normal curve. Some people are very happy off of 6 or 7. Other people will naturally require 8 or 9. I would also offer, if you're going through something stressful, if you're exercising a lot, you probably are going to need a bit more sleep so that you can do that repair. Okay. Additional to that, you also want to consider environmental things that can compromise the quality of your sleep. You being in bed and asleep per se for 8 hours doesn't mean you necessarily got a good amount of sleep. If you're drinking alcohol, for example, that will greatly skew the sleep stages that you go through. And so I would say, even though maybe you get 8 hours, that's not a quality 8 hours. Okay. We also know that exposure to blue light and other things like that, blue light will impact BDNF, as well as separately it impacts sleep quality. So again, I think there's a lot of the powers that be. We've done a lot of webinars on kind of sleep and different things that could impact quality, but I'd really make sure you break it down against those two parameters. What is your body most happy with from a time perspective? And then what are you doing that might actually rob you of the quality of your sleep? Because getting those sleep cycles in, getting the deep sleep in particular in, very, very, very important. Okay. All right. So let's move on to, excuse me, let's move on to things that you can do to support and increase your BDNF. All right. Um, so first thing, and this is, we're gonna dig through some lifestyle things. And I think BDNF is really, really cool in that most research has focused on lifestyle things that you can be doing. We're gonna talk about supplements, but I want to make sure we're going through our the lifestyle things first. First and foremost, exercise, exercise, exercise will increase BDNF. There's so many good things that come from exercise. Okay. Most studied is going to be aerobic, meaning you're doing your cardio, you're doing your workout, your cardio workout, or HIIT training, HIIT being the high intensity interval training. Okay. Both of those are shown to increase BDNF in people. Now, for the folks out there that if you have your cardiovascular report and you know your 9p21 status and it says you're a 6G and all the horrible cardio things, and we advise that you actually do weight resistant training instead of your marathon training, there's a beautiful suite of evidence that says exercise in general, and this includes strength training, right? That weight resistant that I really in particular encourage females to be doing, and against osteoporosis, right? That will also encourage levels of BDNF. Okay. So exercise, probably one of the most well-researched spaces when it comes to how do you increase BDNF, and categorically it does it, right? So if you have a 9p21 profile that says, hey, you're good to go for cardio, get at it. It's the most studied, best, robust way. If you're someone, self-included, your cardiovascular genes say nah, then weight resistant training, beautiful for supporting your BDNF. Okay. Next, we want to look at something called hermetic stresses or good stresses. Okay. So this is going to be, think of saunas or think of cold plunges. Okay. These things, this stress on the body will increase BDNF. Honestly, one of my litmus tests, one of my tests, if I don't have someone's gene and I want to know where their BDNF status is, I say, if you've had a really rough day and you go take a shower, do you feel like a hot shower? Do you feel better? And almost like, this isn't a real statistic, but I would say almost 90% of people who say, oh my gosh, that's the cure to everything, they are people who naturally, genetically speaking, don't have great BDNF. So heat, that exposure within the sauna, will increase levels of BDNF, as well as there's some emerging evidence that really looks at cold plunges. Do not understand you people, but if you like getting in cold, okay, that's also shown to increase BDNF. Okay. And so I do sometimes get the question from people, and this is, you know, really that dissecting of what is best, right? Some people say, okay, what sort of sauna? Can it be the hot kind of traditional Finnish sauna? Does it can be the infrared? Right now, I don't think there's enough research to say one is superior to the other when it comes to BDNF, right? The infrared definitely has some mitochondrial benefit, but let's not split hairs here. If it's to the end of improving your BDNF, okay, any sort of sauna exposure, assuming you're cleared by a doctor and assuming, you know, you're not putting yourself in a state of danger where you're kind of in there for hours on end and you're dehydrating yourself, both of them will support. And I think there's something really interesting here. When we look at population studies, namely populations that are Nordic, so Northern European, by and large, they tend to have a poor genetic presentation of BDNF, meaning if you're from a Nordic country, statistically speaking, you're more likely to have suboptimal genes towards this. What else do all those Nordic countries have culturally? They have sauna. You know, this isn't, I'm not saying this is causal or anything to that. I just think it's really interesting that when there's a genetic weakness, when there's that suboptimality towards creating BDNF, we naturally go towards things that support and enable that creation. Okay. So far we've said exercise. So far we've said sauna, or for the crazy folk out there, cold plunges. I'm sure, I don't think you're crazy. I don't understand. um, the next thing that you can also do is going to be fasting. Okay. And I'm not talking time restricted eating. Time restricted eating really meaning I have a window during the day that I do or do not eat within. I'm talking several days. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I think that you really do need to engage with a practitioner to understand, A, is fasting appropriate for you? There's a lot of medical conditions that say maybe not, but also separately, how do you go about fasting? Right? You need to ensure you're supporting electrolytes properly. You need to ensure that there's a few other considerations met before you do it. But assuming all those boxes are checked, fasts that, range from either fastic mimicking or straight up fasting for 3 to 5 days beautifully support BDNF amongst a whole host of other things. I think powers that be at some point in time, we should probably talk about fasting. It's something I get a lot of questions on. Okay. Oh my gosh, I love just quickly looking in the chat. Roberta is going to grab her barbells as we do this. I adore that so very much. I will dance. You can barbell. We're going to have a little bit of a party here. All right. Next, what I want to continue on. So we've talked about exercise. We've talked about sauna or the crazy cold plunges. Okay. We've talked about fasting now, at least that's something to the end that will support BDNF. Okay. Last thing that you really do need to get in check is going to be appropriate vitamin D and appropriate light. Light hygiene, right? So that means proper exposure in the morning as well as throughout the day, okay? And abstinence in the evening of your blue light. That really goes a long way towards optimizing your BDNF, okay? My Dr. Mansour, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, a mentor of mine in this space. Now, this is hyperbole, this is exaggeration, but I think it's very apt. He used to say if you have suboptimal BDNF, okay, and late at night you expose yourself to, blue light, be that your cell phone or your TV screen, whatever screen might be in your world, he's like, short of a horse tranquilizer, you're not going to get a good sleep, right? And so if I go back to the question, I think it was Gina asked around, what exactly does good sleep mean? Okay, that kind of speaks to that quality aspect. You might be in bed for 8 hours. You might think you're asleep for 8 hours, but does that mean you got a good quality sleep, right? For those that are genetically suboptimal and you expose yourself to that bright light at night, you're kind of messing up your BDNF in a way that you're impairing and disabling some of that sleep, that work effort that you're putting in. Okay, so light, both exposure in the morning and abstinence at night. Okay, very important. And then as well to the creation and utilization of it, vitamin D. Okay, so I really encourage, go understand your vitamin D genes, go get blood work, understand you're supplementing properly, right? I tend to see people in two extremes, either people that are scary low or people that are scary high. Make sure you're doing your blood work so you're happily in the good range. Okay. All right. So those are the things from a lifestyle perspective. I now really want to talk about from a supplement perspective, what you can do. And I think this sits strongly in my heart because when I see people who come in who in particular are struggling with mental health, maybe a depression or anxiety, some of this supplementation, right? Um, and these, I'm talking more mild to moderate. I'm not talking the extremes, right? If you're in that extreme, we're talking more strong agents than per se just supplements. But if you're sitting in that mild to moderate range, some of these supplements I find very vital and important towards helping shift that person in their ability to do, right? Because when you're in the throes of depression, anxiety, or perhaps, somewhere along that PTSD spectrum where you're really stuck in your head, me telling you, like, go exercise, go eat well, go do these sorts of things, right? Um, Unfortunately, those can feel like barriers and not possible. And I find some of the supplementation that is able to support BDNF actually doesn't fix things, but it gives them enough space that they can then start exercising and eating properly. Okay, so what on earth are those supplements? There's two that I really focus on here. The first one that many people are well aware of and has a funky little name. And if anyone's eaten it, please put it in the comment because I think it's absolutely delicious. It's something called lion's mane. Lion manes is a white mushroom, absolutely delicious. If you can find it at your farmer's market, I really encourage it. But it's something that taken in higher doses, medicinal doses, not necessarily what you'd be getting if you're eating it, right? Higher doses is shown to encourage BDNF, right? If you go to a supplement store and you go to that kind of like cognitive mental health section, you'll see lion's mane everywhere and they're all claiming it, makes everything in the brain better. One of the mechanisms that it does that through is going to be BDNF, okay? Just a quick call out here because I really like to keep economy in mind and accessibility in mind. I adore this mushroom. I think it's so wonderful. That said, if you're using it as an agent, okay, to increase BDNF, it can become really expensive because the medicinal dosing for this is about 4 to 6 grams, and that is a very expensive dose for a lot of people. Okay, something to keep in mind. The next thing that I'm going to talk about from a cost perspective, a lot more accessible. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is green coffee fruit extract. All right. I'm being very specific here. I am not talking about coffee. If that bean has been roasted and made into the beautiful elixir of the god that is coffee, okay, you're not getting the benefit from it. This is very specific to a stage of the coffee plant and a very specific extraction. Okay, as much as we all love our coffee, coffee's not helping BDNF to this end. Okay, it's a very specific extraction process of a very specific stage of the coffee fruit. Okay. But when extracted like this, it is shown to help increase BDNF. Okay. So it's something that you can easily take once a day. It's within our BDNF optimizer. It's within black label sorts of things if you want to be doing it. And again, it's one of those things I think, especially if you're struggling with a little bit of ability to act, a little bit of an ability to separate yourself from some things. Okay. I find that after a few weeks of taking this, usually 3 to 4, sometimes a bit longer, right? What happens then is the person has a little bit of space and breath between their experience and then what's happening. And then that gives them the space to act, to do the exercise, to do the sauna, to do things like that. Okay. So that is a supplement that you can be considering, okay? There's a few other things that would really complement that. There's a few phosphatidylserines, there's bacopa, there's other things that would complement that, but those two agents very specifically, lion's mane and green coffee fruit extract, are studied to the end of BDNF. Okay. I think at this point in time, we're going to very gently start shifting over to our questions and answers. Before I open that box, I just see a few. I'm just going to quickly scan the chat because I know I kept inviting people to talk to me in the chat. Jamel's asking what are optimal levels of vitamin D. If you're in the US versus if you're kind of in a metric like a Canadian or a UK country, in the US, usually the range is going to sit between 50 and 70. Okay. If you're in Canada or other metric countries, that range will usually sit between 100 and 120. I want to acknowledge there's a lot of debate. There's some people that will push in the US up to 80, some people within metric countries up to 130, somewhere in those spaces. Okay. Um, I would really encourage that you're doing this under the guidance of a doctor, because once you push your vitamin D too far, it really disrupts calcium, it disrupts some bone activity, it disrupts a few things. And so there is detriment that can come from it. Okay. Usually you're not going to see it at the 80 or the 130, but anything above that, you're kind of running a risk there. Okay. So for Americans, 60 to 60, 70, somewhere in that space. Okay. For our Canadians, usually 110, 120, 100, somewhere in those spaces. Okay. And I think that's it, at least from the chat. At least I hope I caught everyone's questions within the chat. I'm now going to shift to the questions and answers. So just give me un momento, s'il vous plaît. D'accord. All right. So let's start scanning some of these questions. All right. So the first question I have here, I love it. Ideas for combining exercise with cognitive activities besides dance. All right. So cognitive activities besides dance. All right. So I think by and large, anything cardiovascular, right, is studied to be exceptionally beneficial to brain and to a lot of dementia and kind of other cognitive outcomes. Okay. And so really, I think part of the reason dance is so successful is that when you're engaged in it, you really enjoy it. You're listening to music, there's several senses going on. Okay. There's a really neat, there's a small suite of studies that looked at how else can you optimize exercise, right? Enjoyment was a huge part of it, i.e., I hate running. And so even though running per se might be great for my health, if I hate it, you're kind of competing there, right? You're kind of not, I wouldn't say necessarily nullifying, but it's not going to serve you as well as if you were to partake in something that you enjoy, maybe like soccer, football. Okay. Another thing, and I think this is really cool, especially for people trying to optimize BDNF, exercise in the sun. There's a little bit of combined efforts there when it comes to mental health and a few other parameters. So if you don't like dancing, consider maybe when you do your exercise, and in particular, are you able to do it within the sun? That tends to have some cumulative additive benefit there. Okay. Let's see. August is asking, um, okay. August, and actually, August is asking a really interesting question. August, I need to be honest, I have a book on my shelf that I've been meaning to read so that I could peer deeper into this question because music is amongst my favorite drugs. August is asking, is there evidence that music can specifically stimulate BDNF? Music stimulates the brain. There's a lot of health benefit from a memory perspective and from many other different parameters as to what music can do, especially given it activates different regions of the brain that we don't necessarily use a lot. I don't think there's studies specific to music and BDNF. That said, I'm willing to be wrong. And I think once I finish up my book, I'll speak to that maybe through a blog, or I'll offer some insight into that because I think music is medicine, and there's a lot of science, especially coming out of McGill University, which is on many forefronts when it comes to neuroscience, that says music is very integral to health. I don't think there's studies specific though to um, BDNF and music though. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Um, let's see. So I apologize. I'm not going to say this name correctly. Shalini. Okay. So Shalini is asking, can BDNF help the brain recover from what is lost due to stroke? Okay. That's a very difficult question to answer. And the reason is it depends on the sort of stroke, and it depends on how far reaching, how significant it is. Okay. From more a uh, minor stroke, kind of past the smaller scale strokes, I would offer, and I'd have to go back into literature. I think there's some evidence that this can be helpful, right? But when we're talking larger scale, kind of those more catastrophic strokes, I think that supporting BDNF is vital to that recovery plan, but can it get back the function that was lost from before? Probably not, depending on the anatomy and the extent of the injury. Okay, so I'm couching my answer. I'm kind of grading it based on the actual trauma that was done. I would offer categorically, is it important to support BDNF? Absolutely, because even if you can't restore that area of the brain, okay, think about, you're going to have to compensate in other areas of the brain. Okay, and so being able to support that learning process of, if I can no longer do this because of that debility, how do I function in different ways? BDNF is going to be really vital to that process. So while it may not be able to support and repair injury, it can, at least in that rehab and that relearning of the world, be very, very important for the person who's had the stroke. And then very important as well, the people who are caregivers, right? Be mindful of the caregivers. They're going to be enduring that chronic stress. They too need to be supporting their BDNF, both from that brain protection perspective, but separate to that, so that they're on the ball, they're happy, and they're able to continue supporting. Okay. Corey is asking how long is a good deep sleep cycle? Most people by and large will cycle you over the course of 3 to 4 hours. There's an element of, other factors like alcohol, like exposures, like. So that will play into it. But 3 to 4 hours with those cycles kind of shortening as you get closer to the morning. Okay. The first few cycles being longer. All right. Roberta. All right. What is the best way to increase deep sleep time? All right, let's hear it. Okay. Well, I'm not going to go too in depth to this. I think I will ask the powers that be to kind of within the chat or within the show notes, put here links and resources to some of the webinars we've did on sleep. First and foremost, consistency and sleep hygiene. Okay, so sleep hygiene really means dark, cold room, right? Cool, cold, somewhere in that space. I think for Americans that sits at 62. I apologize. I do not know imperial very well. For those in metric, you're talking about like in around 16, 18. Sometimes people will go a little bit lower than that. Okay. So that's really important, having kind of that clean sleeping environment, quiet, potentially a noise machine. Separate to that, think of light hygiene. This is very specific to BDNF. Light hygiene meaning in the morning, getting that sun exposure, right? And then in the evening, ensuring there's a level of abstinence. I haven't read this research specifically, but I have heard rummagings too, that especially that the light frequency or the light spectrum as the sun sets will really influence good sleep. I don't know how sound that is, but watching a sunset, I would offer as a beautiful, good transition from day to night. So that can be there. I would also think through things like within your DNA 360 report, it will talk about constitutional weaknesses. So for example, are you poor at detoxing? Are you poor at creating your serotonin? Do you have poor sex steroid hormone management, right? I would offer understanding your constitutional weaknesses and addressing those. Very, very, very important to increasing your deep sleep. Because if you have things that are wearing away, like alcohol is the easy example, right? We know alcohol will disrupt sleep. But let's say, for example, you're exposed to a lot of chronic inflammation because you're poor at detoxing. That will also take away from your deep sleep. Okay. So first and foremost, get your sleep hygiene down, get your consistency down, get your light and dark habits down. And then further to that, really understanding your body's weak points. How do you address those? Because once you have that cleaner environment for your body, okay, that's gonna offer to better deep sleep, which is that like in a positive way, a positive feedback loop, right? The cleaner your body is, the better your sleep is, the cleaner your body will be. It's a happy little snake eating itself there. Okay. I hope that was a sound answer there for you, Roberta. Jessica, who can you speak to about DNAU? I will ask the powers that be to reach out to you. We can get in touch with you and support your understanding. For the audience's awareness, DNAU is a space that if you're a practitioner or a fellow nerd, someone that really loves to dive deep, it's a space where we offer additional learning, deep dives into our interpretation, awareness of genes, and how that all can be applied to your health. It's a little bit geared towards healthcare providers, but I do have a few eager nerds within I mean nerds as a compliment. I hope no one's taking that as an insult. But I have a few eager nerds within my life, and they have all found it helpful, even if they are not healthcare providers. Okay. Um, all right. The next question I'm seeing here is in regards to sauna, right? So really that, how do we improve our BDNF? Sauna being one of the happy things. How much time per day should you be exposed to heat through sauna or hot shower? So I would offer, there's going to be different protocols. There's different studies, right? Some people will say, oh, you should be in the sauna for about 40 minutes. Others are, the more Eastern European protocols are going to be kind of that in and out, that fluctuating in between. Two answers to this. The first answer is what works for you, right? You don't want to sacrifice the good for the perfect. So if you're someone that the only thing your life is going to accommodate is 20 minutes 3 times a week, that is perfect for you. Okay. Do not sacrifice the good for the perfect. if you have, this is something that's more a priority, you're more flexible, or you're very disciplined, right? Okay. Studies tend to say, in and around 30 to 40 minutes if you're just doing sauna. If you're doing some alternations, right, probably 20 minutes in the sauna and then maybe a bit of a cold plunge. There's a few different protocols. And so I think there's a little bit of a degree there to personalization, right? I think a lot of these protocols are kind of, a lot of people will kind of say, this is the perfect protocol and everyone should follow it. And as someone that studies personalized medicine, individualized health, there's so many variables. And so do what feels good to your body. Okay. Usually that tends to be the best gauge there. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. Mary. So Kashif said that infrared sauna does not help BDNF, but you need the kind that the Finns and the Nordics do. So I have not seen the research, to be honest, that says infrared does not help with BDNF. Okay. That said, I did kind of lend to, I don't think there's enough for us to know which is better, which is worse. I think both offer benefit. But I will happily parlay with him and see if he can send me the paper that's very specific to that. I haven't read that one yet. Okay. Carol. Okay, so Carol's saying if you go to sleep by 10, what time should you be stopping blue light? Okay, so I like the reverse engineering here, right? So I think it was actually Dr. Sapp, who's a clinician on our team. She has a really, really good rule. It's called 3-2-1. Okay. So, and I actually, hold on, it should probably be 4-3-2. I apologize, Dr. Sapp. So 4 hours before bed, ideally you're stopping eating, okay, and consuming. You want to make sure you have some digestion time. 3 hours before bed, you're probably starting to pull back on some of that very bright and stimulating light, right? So what does that mean? Screens. And from an overhead perspective, a lot of those halogens or anything that's really going to mimic the sun. I want to be honest, most people are going to be like 3 hours before bed. No, because if that means, 7 o'clock, if you're going by your 10, cool. Don't look into blue light blocking glasses, look into, can you reduce contrast on your screen? Can you remove blue light from your screen? There's several different compromises. So I would offer there's an element of experimentation, right? And then the 2-to-1, you're really looking at your decreasing your water intake because you don't want to be going to bed on a completely full bladder or something that can wake you during the evening. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I really want to again acknowledge, do not sacrifice the good for the perfect, right? Especially in modern society, asking someone to shut their phone off 3 hours before bed. Majority of the people here, and then please toss a comment in if you were amongst the blessed that are like, cool, I can do that. But a lot of people struggle with that. So if you can't do the 3 hours beforehand, okay, consider, right? Consider blue light blocking glasses, or maybe 2 hours before bed, you're not doing screens. Because think about also, additional to that, think about what else screens are delivering. Independent of the light, the screen might be delivering kind of very emotive things or things that engage your sympathetic, that fight or flight, that system that is antithetical to sleep. So be very mindful that, even if you need a screen, make sure it's not something that's going to be agitating your sleep as well. Okay. All right. Dirk. Okay. Dirk is asking, is the autophagy from fasting that supports production of BDNF, or is it some other factor or process? Both. So the autophagy that will come from fasting helps clean things up, helps refresh things. So absolutely, but that's not necessarily the direct. It's going to be, the direct is going to be more, you're effectively putting your body in a state of stress. And so the body responds with things that are very healing to it. Okay. And it's more that mechanism that enables some of that rest and repair that happens when your body isn't just focused on, right? We know that, I think it's about 24, depends on the person, but about 24 hours into a fast, the body kind of supports you with this flood of growth hormone amongst other things. Okay. And so it's other mechanisms, but the autophagy indirectly helps insofar as it cleans up the environment and enables the cells to function more properly, function on their task, as opposed to um, managing everything else and managing the debris and the cleanup and everything like that. Okay. Uh, does red light therapy or PEMF support production of BDNF? Again, I think to the end of supporting cells, absolutely yes. I'm not familiar with kind of the literature that connects the two. So I'm very, I'm very plain in saying if I haven't read that literature myself, I won't offer comment. So I'm going to say indirectly, yep. As to a direct mechanism, I don't have a comment there because I'm not up on that literature. Okay. All right, so Patty is saying she has suboptimal genes and takes BDNF. I would imagine you're talking about, I would imagine our BDNF optimizer, so a supplement that supports. To my awareness, you can't take BDNF, but cool if you can. No one can tell me how often and when to take them. Yep, because I think really you do need to be talking with your primary care provider. What I can offer is the directions on the bottle are going to be taking this once a day, ideally in the morning. Okay, so for green coffee fruit extract, which is the primary actor within those formulations, okay, there is modest trace amounts of caffeine. I'll be honest, if you drink even just 1 cup of coffee a day, that caffeine is negligible. It's not going to register within the body, right? But because this really engages BDNF within the body, there is an energizing impact that is completely outside of caffeine. So the direction would be to be taking it in the morning, okay? Because you don't want that energizing just before bed, okay? And by and large, be 1 to 2 capsules. Again, I think the specification there really comes down to your provider. A lot of research around green coffee fruit extract sits in and around 200 milligrams per day. But again, there's going to be personalizing factors that might decrease or increase how much you need to be taking. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Next here, a favored anonymous. How do we measure our levels of BDNF? Thank you, Daria. So we don't. Okay, so BDNF, it's something that is captured exclusively within the brain. So the brain is protected, shielded, hosted, comforted, hugged by something called the blood-brain barrier. It's a very, very well thought out system that the body keeps the brain separate from everything else in the body. There's an exchange, there's very specific cells that say you can come in and out of this. So BDNF is something that's always kept within that. So it's not something per se that we can like take a blood sample. Now, I just said, I can hear your question, anonymous. You just said that green coffee fruit extract is studied to increase. Yes is the answer. A lot of this is surrogate markers. So there are things within the blood that we can use as surrogate. They really reflect the level of BDNF that we have in the brain. So those surrogate markers are what is tested. Those happen often. I do not believe there's a commercially, Dr. Bryce Wild would be able to hold me honest on this. I do not believe there's a commercially available test. Okay, it's all indirect measurements, and the direct measurements within the blood tend to be more within research settings. Okay. So we do know it works. Can you get a test that says this is your level of BDNF? Unfortunately not, but we're really good at estimating kind of where you sit based on clinical intake, and then separate to that, where your genes / how old you are. Okay. Um, let's see. So Yvonne is asking, hey Yvonne, there's a lot said about depression and anxiety. What about bipolar disorder? How does that interact with BDNF? I don't have an answer for that one. Bipolar disorder, I think, is, especially in terms of psychiatry and understanding mental health, is, while we've known about it for a while, it's been really difficult to tease it out in clinical presentation, because it was something that we either labeled as depression or labeled as other things. So I think there's a bit of a a refinement in how we're approaching bipolar disorder, especially 1 and 2. And I have not seen literature specific to it. I do know that if you have suboptimal BDNF gene presentation, it's highly correlated with schizophrenia, anxiety, depression. I haven't seen a similar statement around bipolar, and I do not know if that's because it is not relevant to bipolar, or more what I would suspect and assume is the research and the data is not yet readily available to make such statements confirming or denying. Okay, I know that's a bit of a non-answer, but I think it's important we're honest with where we're at in clinical research and clinical science and clinical practice. Okay, all right. Um, the next question here is for Dawn, from Dawn. Dawn is asking, how does BDNF relate to hormones? Yeah, so I'm going to take a drink of water and then I'm going to come to your question. Mhm. The answer is indirectly in all the ways. Okay. So as I mentioned, BDNF is something that not only enables that neural circuitry, right? It enables the maintenance and kind of the keeping fresh and the keeping clean within the brain. Okay. When that is not there, um, you do not have a happy environment that allows the brain to signal down to the body, make these hormones, right? You know how I said there's a growing correlation between metabolism um, and BDNF, right? Again, research is mostly indicating that's not direct insofar as BDNF directly tells insulin what to do, but it's more in the sense that it enables a good brain, it enables good mental health, which then enables an environment to have happy and healthy, so close, happy and healthy hormones. Okay, so we know that it will influence indirectly insulin, right? We know that metabolic disorder is correlated to lower BDNF. Um, I would speculate there's probably a little bit of correlation between sex steroid hormone and BDNF. I haven't seen primary research on that. But again, because it's so influential to circadian rhythm, to the health and wellness of the brain, which then sets the stage for all of these actors, I would imagine there's a strong secondary correlation there. Okay. Uh, Shalini, I really hope I'm saying your name correctly. She's asking, she wanted me to confirm how much lion's mane. 4 to 6 grams per day, correct? Again, talk to your physician. There's going to be a window within that. That tends to be the opening, the minimal clinical dose, right? Sometimes people will need to go a little bit higher, and that tends to be the hot water extract. Okay. I principally work with hot water extract, and so that would be more the powder form. Other people prefer tincture. So 4 to 6 grams is very specific to the hot water extract form, the powder form. Okay, tincture, there's going to be different dosing, and you'd have to look at whoever has created that tincture. Tincture is just kind of like the hot water extract. There's a few elements that go into that, and so I won't speak to, because I think you'd have to look at the individual tincture to know. Okay, I hope that was helpful. For those that are kind of like, what on earth is she saying around tincture? Think of tincture kind of like tea, insofar as it's a very specific extraction process from plants, right? You stick a tea bag in hot water, and then all the happy phytonutrients, phytochemicals come out of that tea bag, come out of those plants. It's a similar process, but instead of using water, you're either going to be using an alcohol or using a glycerin. Okay, so it's very specific. It tends to be a lot more concentrated, right? You're not talking about you're taking like a cup of tincture. That's way too much. It's much more concentrated that, but that's what a tincture is. It's an herbal way of extracting the plant elements from to concentrate the medicine within the plant. All right. Shalini again is asking, does BDNF help rewire the brain? Yes, that is principally its most important function within the brain. So when we talk about neuroplasticity meaning the ability of the brain to form new neuronal connections, and separate to that, the ability of the brain to change those connections, BDNF is absolutely vital to that. I think to date, when we talk about mental health and when we talk about a lot of brain research, it's principally been looking at learning, right? How do I acquire new skills? How do we form new connections within the brain? I would offer what is as important, and as you progress in life, arguably more important, is going to be the capacity to unlearn or shift some of those connections. Okay? Because think about this, right? You've been living your lovely little life for 60 years. And if you've always been walking, for example, like this, there are very formed networks, very formed neural pathways within your brain that do that to the end of you're not even thinking about how you're walking like this, right? But let's pretend for some reason, right? We learned that moving your arms when you walk doesn't work out very well. Work with me here, pretend, right? You need to unlearn that. You need to shift, take away some of those connections, take away that pathway so that when you're walking, you're no longer doing this, right? Unlearning is as important, especially as we get older, to learning. And BDNF is vital to that. It is vital to saying, cool, we used to have this pathway, no more. We're going to shift and change that pathway. We're going to unlearn, disassemble that pathway. Okay, so is BDNF important to learning, unlearning, to the changes that we can do within the architecture of the brain? Yes, ma'am. Very, very important. All right. Corey is asking, uh, mhm. So she's saying she wears an Aura ring and it rates her overall sleep in the low to mid 80s, but the deep sleep is only ever an hour. Okay, so um, for those that aren't familiar with Aura, when you wake up in the morning, it says, "Hey, we're giving you a score out of 100 as to how you slept." So having low to mid 80s is to my awareness a good score, right? I mean, obviously everyone wants in the 90s. We want our overachieving when it comes to sleep, but sleep, I think, especially for modern people, low to mid 80s is spectacular. Top notch, Corey. She's saying, though, the phasing of sleep that it's telling her deep sleep, isn't all that long, only about an hour. She's seeking a bit more. So first and foremost, Corey, there's an element of how old you are. As we get older, our capacity to have that deep sleep can be challenged. Other things that can influence that, deep sleep is principally done within your first half of your night. So if you're someone that sleeps, let's say, from 10 until 6, that window from 10 until 2 is really going to be when you have the most concentrated, longest lengths of deep sleep. You'll still get a few little bites in that 2 to 6 range, right? But principally, it's going to be within that. So you have to be thinking through light exposures. You're going to have to be thinking about, are you digesting? There's a lot of little hacks. Separate to that, you might want to consult your DNA 360. There's several different things that you want to consider. How do you support that, right? When it comes to BDNF production, a lot of the cleanup and optimizing that, temperature in the room and of body is very, very important. One of the signals, one of the cues that kicks off a lot of that, okay, is going to be a colder sleep environment. Your body quite literally decreases its temperature during that time. So also investigating how cold is your room, is your environment, right? So things like that, I think there's a lot that can be done to fine tune there. So I'd really encourage you engaging with your practitioner, engaging with one of our practitioners, right? Our practitioners are really, really wonderful, compassionate, loving detectives. We really care about people's health, right? And we'll meet you where you need that to be, right? We have a lot of people who are very direct problem solvers. Here's your problem list. And then we have other people that are a little bit more soft and fuzzy. You let us know what you need, and we're going to help you figure that out. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. So our anonymous friend is asking, is BDNF low in people with schizophrenia? Yes. So I don't want to set this up as if it's a causal factor, as if, if you have low BDNF, then you will have schizophrenia. But the gene in particular, suboptimal presentation, is correlated with presentation of schizophrenia as well. And so it's one of those, again, I said, dementia, it's multifactorial. You're never going to pin it on one thing. With schizophrenia, same. You're never going to pin it on one thing, but lower BDNF tends to be pretty common in people with schizophrenia. Okay, so something to consider there. All right. Let's see. Our next question is going to be again from Corey. Is steam room beneficial? So this is kind of getting to that concept of sauna to the end of improving BDNF. Again, don't sacrifice the good for the perfect. If all you have access to is steam sauna, it is spectacular. By and large, though, I want to acknowledge it can't get as hot as your Finnish or your infrared. And so it may not have those benefits, but again, think back to my litmus test for BDNF. If you take a hot shower, right, do you feel better? So even that just says that small exposure to heat, to water, that it can't burn the skin isn't necessarily getting you up there. You feel better after that. So again, don't sacrifice the perfect for the good. If all you have is steam, go enjoy it. If it's what you enjoy most and it will get you doing this consistently, it is by far the best sauna sort for you. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Anonymous. You're very active this evening, Anonymous, or maybe several Anonymouses. Anonymi? Anonymi? Something like that. If you know the answer to that question, please pop it in the chat. I really like words, so I'd love to know how you pluralize anonymous. Okay, is it okay to do sauna every day post-menopause when I think this person means thyroid is underworking? Okay, so is it okay to do sauna every day post-menopause? I would offer, you've just listed several different complications that you really need to lab work, kind of other states of health. There's other parameters that I'd want to understand before I can give an answer to that. So I would really, really encourage you to go to your doctor to understand what's going on there, especially if your thyroid is not working properly. I think that's what you meant. If your thyroid is not working properly, that probably needs to be addressed before you're putting on a stress to the body like sauna. Again, I think, you know, within this space, when it comes to supplements or these sorts of fasting, people are like, oh, I don't need support. I would offer you really do, because you do need to understand how your body is going to respond to that. Can we better support your body to that end? We don't want you getting in the sauna and it being a stress that taxes the body in an undue way. Okay. So I'd really encourage you, Anonymous, to speak with your primary care provider, or you can even engage with one of our clinicians here. Again, we can support that workup to understand what's going on, and eventually, if it's appropriate to, but I would offer you're probably going to have to address the thyroid issues before that. Okay. Last question of the evening. Carol is asking, BDNF and dyslexia, are they related? It's a wonderful question. To my awareness, no, but I have not done a primary research into that. So I don't know. Indirectly, absolutely, because BDNF, anything that comes to cognition, indirectly, it's going to be related. I would have to dig into medical journals to know if there's research that says specifically the two are correlated. I don't know. But if you want to send someone of our team that note, I'll do some digging and see if I can find an answer for you, because that's a very curious question. I like the question. I don't know. All righty. Okay, folks, I think we're getting to the end of our time. I don't see any other questions. I'm so very grateful to everyone that joins us this evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for wanting to learn. Thank you for being nerds alongside me. And more so than that, thank you so very much for being interested in your health and discovering ways that you can support your health so that you can navigate the world in a very happy and fun way. So thank you so very much for being here this evening. I'm back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, I don't know what we're doing, but we're here again, same bat time, same bat channel. If there's any Adam West fans in the house, please come back for no other reason than I really like you.
Doctor, I have to tell you, I'm exceedingly impressed that one, you know who Adam West is, and that two, you pulled this off at the last minute all by yourself. I have to tell you, you did a phenomenal job. And if you look in the chat, everybody's telling you how absolutely bloody amazing you are and what a great job you did. So thank you so much for that. And I too have no idea what you're talking about tomorrow, but I will definitely be tuning in because you made this a lot of fun tonight. And I know the rest of you think that too. So great job, Dr. Kosterman. Thank you all for attending and staying to the very end. We really appreciate you as our community. Team on the back end, great job, everybody. Thank you so much. Good night, doctor.
Au revoir. Bonne nuit.